Hi, I'm Charlotte Whitmore, and I wasn't invited to the family meeting, but I'm the one holding the pen that signs their budget. It was a Tuesday morning when the silence in my inbox told me everything I needed to know. The family meeting, the big one, the one they'd been building up to for weeks, with hush-hush calls and locked-door lunches. It had happened, without me. At first, I thought it was an oversight. I checked my calendar 3 times, scrolled through every message thread with my sister Melody and our mother, Evelyn. Nothing, not a word. No text, no missed call, no, "Hey, we're meeting Tuesday, be there." Just a line in the quarterly board update. Meeting notes available upon request. All key stakeholders present. Except I wasn't. And here's the twist. I'm the one who approves the damn funding. Not just figuratively, literally. I manage the portfolio that provides our family's company with over 60% of its operating capital through structured quarterly allocations from my firm. So why the hell wasn't I in that room? I sat at my kitchen table, hand wrapped around a mug of coffee I didn't remember pouring, watching the steam twist like a question mark above it. Outside, the Chicago skyline stretched cold and gray across the horizon, like a painting I could no longer touch. The Whitmore family built its fortune from timber and transport, old money, old values, and older grudges. But I'd always believed, perhaps naively, that competence could carve a place where love had failed. Apparently, I was wrong. "You're overthinking it," Melody had said a few days before. She was stirring oat milk into her tea, acting as though we were two girlfriends swapping weekend plans instead of two women from a bloodline that knew how to weaponize silence. "You really think they'd meet without telling me?" I had asked her. "I'm sure it's just the small team, nothing major. You know how Dad gets too many voices and he starts pacing like a cat in a cage." She didn't look me in the eye when she said it. Melody was always like that, sweet, almost convincing. But she had a tell, her fingers. They always tapped when she lied. That day, they danced like raindrops on a tin roof. Let me paint the scene. My parents' estate sits on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina. Rolling hills, wraparound porch, and a living room big enough to host a wedding reception. That's where the meeting happened. Not in an office, not on Zoom, but right there, in the house I grew up in. The one they told me I'd inherit a piece of, until I stopped playing along. I didn't leave the family business. They shoved me out the side door and locked it behind me. Politely, of course, with the kind of cold civility only white Southern families have mastered. "You're just too intense, Charlotte," my mother once said. "Your energy, it drains the room." When I called my father that morning, he didn't answer. I wasn't surprised. But what he did do surprised me more than any voicemail ever could. He sent me an email. Just a single line. It wasn't personal. It was just about the future of the company. Not personal? I wanted to scream. I wanted to fly down there, walk into that damn living room, and ask him what kind of future excluded his own daughter, especially the one who was keeping the lights on. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there in my quiet apartment, let the silence wrap around me like a wool coat I didn't ask to wear, and I made a decision. If they wanted war, I'd give them something more dangerous. I'd give them control. Just not the kind they expected. Let me tell you something about control. It doesn't always look like shouting in a boardroom or slamming fists on mahogany desks. Sometimes it's quiet. It's the button you don't push, the deal you don't sign, the silence you let stretch long enough for someone to panic. And my family? They were about to learn what silence really sounded like. "Charlotte!" It was a voice I hadn't heard in months. Margaret, my father's assistant. We thought you'd be on the quarterly call this morning." My smile was polite. My words weren't. "Oh, I assumed since I wasn't invited to the actual meeting, my voice wasn't needed anymore." She stammered, tried to recover, said something about confusion in the schedule. But I wasn't listening. What I heard, loud and clear, was that they'd underestimated me, again. And that was going to cost them. The wind hit sharp when I stepped onto the sidewalk outside my building. Early spring in Chicago always carried the sting of winter's leftovers. That morning, it felt colder than usual. Or maybe I just felt exposed. I hadn't slept. Not really. Just a few hours of tossing, then sitting up with old family ledgers spread across my dining table, illuminated by the soft yellow light of the chandelier I installed myself. One of the few things in my life I could control without permission. My father's words from the email still rang in my head. It wasn't personal, it was just about the future of the company. There are knives that cut deeper than steel. And in my family, we sharpen ours with passive restraint and carefully worded omission. He didn't scream. He didn't call me ungrateful. He just erased me with a sentence. I wasn't going to scream either, but I would cut. And the blade would be truth. I pulled out my phone and called Carson, my analyst, and someone I trusted more than anyone in that family circle. He used to work for my father's legal team before he couldn't stomach the backdoor deals and shifted to my investment firm. "Run me a forensic on Whitmore Holdings," I said without preamble. "Last 6 quarters, especially anything under Evelyn or the discretionary fund marked Legacy Initiative." There was a pause. "You sure you want to open that can?" "I'm not opening it," I said. "I'm burning it down." Back in my office, floor 42 of a steel and glass fortress downtown, I dropped into my chair and stared out the window. From here, the city looked calm, balanced. Nothing like the people running my family's company. An hour later, Carson walked in with a folder, and that look he gets when he knows the news isn't good, but it's useful. "I found something," he said. He dropped the file on the desk and slid it toward me. My heart thudded once, hard. Inside were copies of financial transfers, personal transfers, from the Legacy Initiative account to a trust fund in the Cayman Islands. Monthly, neatly stacked, all authorized by Evelyn M. Whitmore, my mother. She once told me that control wasn't about what people saw. It was about what they believed. "If they think you're harmless," she said, "you'll be in the room while they hand you the crown without realizing it." Turns out she took her own advice. And then some. "Look closer," Carson said, tapping a date. One transfer, about 8 months ago, was co-signed by Melody. The signature was subtle, tucked into a form listed as consulting services. The money went to a shell company called Pinecore Consulting LLC. My stomach turned. Pinecore wasn't just any shell. It used to be my father's political slush fund. A dusty relic from the years he considered running for governor. I leaned back, voice calm but eyes blazing. "They're funneling company money through a legacy account to a trust, using an inactive shell firm. That's ballsy. And illegal," Carson added, "but only if someone talks." I didn't need revenge yet. What I needed was leverage. But revenge was starting to taste tempting. 2 days later, I flew to Asheville. The estate hadn't changed. Red brick, white columns, windows too clean to be welcoming. But there were 3 extra SUVs in the driveway, and that told me everything I needed. They were still meeting, just behind tighter doors. The staff recognized me immediately. Miss Charlotte, Mary, the housekeeper, greeted me at the door. "They're in the drawing room." "They know I'm coming?" "No, ma'am." "Even better." I pushed the door open without knocking. Inside sat my mother, Melody, and 2 of my father's oldest friends from the business, Clay Bennett and John Levins, both smiling in that way snakes might if they wore suits and didn't bother hiding their fangs. Evelyn's eyes didn't even flinch. "Well," she said, setting down her glass of white wine, "the prodigal returns." "Don't worry," I said. "I didn't come for the lamb, just a few answers." I pulled out the folder, the one with Carson's findings, dropped it on the coffee table with a satisfying thud. "Interesting light reading," I said, "especially the part where legacy funds are being siphoned offshore. Through Pinecore, no less. You remember Pinecore, don't you, Mom?" Melody paled. Evelyn didn't blink. "I don't know what you think you're doing," she said, voice steely. But storming in here won't get you what you want. You're right, I said. Storming in alone won't. But I have copies of everything, and I'm sure our compliance team at Whitmore Capital would be fascinated by this oversight. I let the words hang. Evelyn studied me, then smiled. Slow, measured. You've always had a flair for drama, Charlotte. And you've always had a talent for pretending you're clean while dragging everyone else through the mud, I shot back. Silence. Clay cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Perhaps we should talk about this later? I turned to him. You should talk to your attorney, because if I find one more dime missing from the legacy initiative, I won't just blow this up. I'll make sure it lands in the hands of every regulator from here to DC. Outside, the air was thicker. The sky felt closer. I didn't know if it was the altitude or the weight of secrets finally coming to light. But something had shifted. They weren't afraid of me yet. But they would be. Ever found out your mother was better at business betrayal than bedtime stories? The day after the confrontation at the estate, Melody called. Not texted, not emailed. She called, like people used to do when words mattered. I let the phone ring 3 times before answering. A deliberate pause. Enough to remind her that I wasn't rushing to pick up anymore. Charlotte, she said, breath catching like she'd rehearsed. You called, I replied flatly. I think we need to talk. That depends. Do you want to talk, or do you want to explain? Silence. Then, I didn't know everything about the transfers, I swear. Mom just said it was a legacy strategy, something Dad approved years ago. I waited. But you signed it. There it was. Melody didn't deny it. She just sighed, soft, defeated. Can we meet? We chose neutral ground, a small, overpriced cafe in downtown Asheville. Not our childhood home, not her condo, definitely not the company offices. The place smelled like rosemary and regret. Melody was already seated when I arrived, her hands wrapped around a latte, like it might protect her from what was coming. Her posture said she was bracing for impact. Good. I sat across from her without a word. She started. Do you remember when we were kids? She said, eyes scanning the chipped tabletop. And Mom would make you sit through etiquette lessons while I got to sneak off with the horses? I stared at her. You mean when she decided you were the delicate one, and I was the weapon? A faint laugh. She always made us play roles. I think we both started believing them. I didn't, I said. I just got tired of pretending her version of strong was the only one that mattered. She looked older than I remembered. Not in the way age marks a face, but in the way guilt carves out shadows beneath your eyes. I almost pitied her. Almost. Why, Mel? My voice softened. Why would you sign something you didn't understand? She looked up then, direct, honest, and terrified. Because if I didn't, she would have cut me out, completely. There it was, the thing none of us ever said aloud. Evelyn didn't raise children, she raised pawns, and when you stepped out of line, she didn't scold. She erased. She said I'd never survive without her, that I needed to stay in line until Dad, until things changed. You mean until he died? Melody flinched, but she didn't correct me. That was the moment I realized something deeper. Melody wasn't just complicit, she was trapped, conditioned, just like I had been. Only I got out. And maybe I was her way out too. I leaned forward, voice quiet. Then help me. She blinked. What? Help me fix this. Help me expose it, clean it up, put the company back where it belongs, and keep it out of her hands. Melody hesitated, long enough to make me question if she had the spine. Then, slowly, she nodded. Okay, but we do it smart. No explosions. No explosions, I said. Just precision cuts. Over the next 2 weeks, Melody began feeding me internal documents, emails, memos, meeting notes. She'd forward them late at night from a private account. I'd review them at dawn with black coffee and a rising fire in my chest. One thread caught my attention: a proposal for restructuring, sent by Evelyn to the board. It aimed to dissolve the legacy initiative altogether and redirect its assets into a private foundation named after her, the Evelyn M. Whitmore Foundation for Executive Development, a name that sounded like a scholarship but walked like a tax shelter. Buried in the language was a clause that would make Melody the acting trustee. I stared at it for a full minute. She wasn't just feeding me scraps, she was being set up as the fall girl. The next time we met, I brought the document. "You know what this is?" I asked, sliding it across the table. Melody scanned it, eyes widening. She said I'd be in charge, that it was her gift to me. "She's handing you a loaded gun with your fingerprints all over it." Melody looked up, tears swimming in her lashes but not falling. "What do I do?" "You sign a different document," I said. "One that puts the foundation into legal suspension and transfers temporary fiduciary control to an independent auditor." She blinked. "You?" "No," I said. "Someone she doesn't see coming. Someone who'll answer only to you, and a contract." Melody signed the transfer a week later. Evelyn didn't find out until her motion to dissolve the initiative was blocked by the state regulator. The house must have shook. 3 days after that, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, scented faintly like her perfume. "You may win this round, but remember where your roots come from. Everything you're using against me, I built first. E." I read it twice. Then I folded it back into the envelope, set it on fire in a ceramic bowl, and poured myself a drink. Roots rot, Evelyn, especially when they're watered with blood. Ever wondered what you'd do if your sister handed you the key to burn down your shared past? The day Evelyn's motion was officially denied, the temperature in Asheville spiked 10 degrees. And it wasn't just the weather. Word traveled fast in old money circles. And when regulators block a move involving 7 figures and the family name attached to half the county, people start whispering like they're praying. I wasn't in Asheville when the news broke. I was in a small boardroom in Chicago, reviewing quarterly forecasts. The irony tasted rich. I was helping a startup grow while my own family's empire was inching toward collapse under the weight of its own secrets. The first real call came from John Levins. His voice was too calm. Men like him don't use calm unless they're hiding panic behind it. "Charlotte," he said, "I'm sure you've heard. The foundation issue, unfortunate misunderstanding." "Unfortunate?" I replied, slow and sharp. "It was a coordinated financial restructuring using a non-compliant mechanism to avoid tax exposure and defraud contributors. But yes, very unfortunate." He chuckled thinly. "Look, nobody wants bad blood. Let's fix this in-house. Talk face to face. I'll even fly to you." "You'll need a return ticket," I said. "And a lawyer." Click. But Evelyn didn't call. Not that day, not the next. Instead, she sent an emissary, Clay Bennett. He met me at a hotel lounge in Charlotte, North Carolina. Always neutral ground. Always behind glass. He wore that same Yale blue tie he'd worn at my christening. A relic. "Your mother's concerned," he began. "I'm sure." "She feels you've made your point, loudly." "No, Clay, she hasn't heard my point yet. That was just the introduction." He sighed, leaned back, then tried a different tactic. "You know, when George dies." "If," I corrected. He blinked. "Say that again?" "I said if. My father isn't dead, Clay. He's not even incapacitated. He's just been conveniently kept out of the loop. By her. And by you." His throat tightened. I could see it just under the crisp collar. I leaned forward. "If you don't pull your support from her by Friday, I'll submit a full audit request to the state controller's office, and I'll make sure every local paper sees the findings." Clay didn't argue. He just nodded. Slowly, quietly, and left. By Sunday, Melody and I were back in Asheville. Not to reconcile, not to talk, to act. We entered the house like ghosts. We knew where the files were kept, Dad's old study, top drawer, false back. Inside, copies of account authorizations, including one Evelyn had forged 6 months ago, signing on behalf of George. It was over. This wasn't speculation anymore. This was criminal. The moment that changed everything came at dusk. We were still in the study, reviewing paperwork, when the front door slammed. Melody froze. I stood. Evelyn entered the room like she owned oxygen. And for a moment, I saw something in her face I hadn't seen since I was a child. Fear. But only for a second. Then she smiled. "So, you've come to loot the ruins?" "No," I said. "We came to rebuild them. Without you." The room fell silent, except for the soft tick of the grandfather clock behind her. She walked to the liquor cart, poured a drink without asking, then turned to us. "You think you've won, don't you? That this little stunt makes you heroes?" "No," Melody said quietly. "We just don't want to keep pretending." Evelyn laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Pretending is what held this family together. You want truth? Fine. Your father gave up on all of this the minute he realized Charlotte wouldn't be a good face for the company." I flinched, but I didn't show it. "You're wrong," I said. "He gave up the moment he started letting you speak for him." Another pause. Then Evelyn's hand, graceful, manicured, gripped the edge of the desk, white-knuckled. "I carried this family," she said, voice low. "I cleaned its messes. I kept its name out of the news, out of courtrooms, and out of tabloids. And what do I get? Betrayal. From my daughters." "No," I said. "You got daughters who finally woke up." She stepped closer to me, drink in hand, like she might hurl it. But she didn't. Instead, she whispered something that stayed with me long after. "You think this is the end of my legacy. It's just the start of yours. Be careful, Charlotte. Power changes people, even the righteous ones." And then she walked out. No screaming, no begging. Just exit stage left. 2 hours later, George Whitmore called me. His voice was weak but clear. "I heard." "About the audit?" "No," he said. "About you standing up to her." A pause. "I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner." My throat closed. I couldn't speak. Not right away. He continued. "There's a safety deposit box. In my name. Use the code word, Magnolia." I nodded, silently. The safety deposit box was in a regional bank. One of those red brick buildings with marble floors and uncomfortable silence. A relic of another time. Fitting, I thought, as the manager guided me into a private room and slid the long silver box across the table. Inside were 3 items. A bound ledger, handwritten in my father's tidy, precise script. A thumb drive with a post-it note, "Play last," and a sealed envelope labeled only to Charlotte. I opened the letter first. "If you're reading this, then you finally did what I couldn't. Put a stop to your mother." I don't know how it happened, but I suspect it wasn't clean. Nothing in this family ever is. The ledger contains notes from meetings I never recorded publicly, conversations, names, assets we were told never to report. Pinecore wasn't the first shadow fund Evelyn used. You asked once why I let her lead. The truth is, I was afraid. Not of her, but of what I'd built with her. If it collapsed, I didn't know who I'd be anymore. But you always knew. That's why she feared you. For a long time, I couldn't breathe. Not from grief, not from rage, but from the quiet, devastating clarity of finally being seen, even if it came too late. I scanned the ledger first. It was meticulous. Dates, code names, cash transfers, offshore accounts that hadn't shown up in any audit. Evelyn had buried more than I imagined. Then I opened the video file on the drive. It was a recording. My father, sitting in his study, his voice slower but steady. "Charlotte, if this reaches you, I'm likely no longer at the table, figuratively or literally. I want to confess something. I knew what your mother was doing, not everything, but enough. And I let her. You deserved more support, more truth, more protection. I didn't give it to you, but maybe I can now. The votes on the board? They're not locked. The bylaws allow for restructuring with a two-thirds majority if the chair is found to be in violation of fiduciary duty. Use what you have. Change the game. Rewrite the rules. But don't become like us. That's the only way you win. He looked down. Then, quietly, added, I'm proud of you. Always was. I just never said it when it mattered. The video ended, and with it, any lingering doubt about what I had to do. 2 days later, I walked into the Whitmore boardroom like I'd been born there. The long mahogany table gleamed. The chairs were filled with the usual suspects: corporate lifers, family loyalists, tired old men who remembered my first ballet recital more clearly than their own ethics. Evelyn sat at the head, regal, cold. But there was a flicker in her eyes the moment she saw me, like she'd already calculated every possible move I might make. She hadn't. I'd like to propose a motion, I said, dropping a folder onto the table. Charlotte, Evelyn began, this isn't the time. It is, I interrupted. Motion to vote on a leadership restructure, citing breach of fiduciary duty under Clause 7B of the Family Bylaws. Gasps. Papers shifted. Someone actually spilled their coffee. Clay Bennett looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. John Levins adjusted his tie. Do you have evidence? I slid the ledger across the table. Dates, signatures, transfers, and a confession, all notarized, all time-stamped. Then, quietly, and I have a recording of George Whitmore authorizing the board to act on his behalf. Evelyn stood, slow and deliberate. You think a power play will fix this? That embarrassing this family in public will somehow make you the better daughter? No, I said, looking her straight in the eye. I think cleaning up your mess will make me the better leader. The vote passed. 5-2. Evelyn didn't stay for the full count. She left the room in silence, but the crack in her facade was louder than any door slam could have been. Afterward, Melody joined me outside the building. She didn't say anything. She just wrapped her arms around me and whispered, You did it. But I didn't smile. Not yet. Because winning, I was learning, didn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it just felt like the first breath after surfacing from a long, dark dive. It rained the morning of the funeral. The kind of cold, deliberate rain that doesn't pour. It clings. Soaks you slowly. Like grief. The church was old, Episcopalian, built from gray stone that felt like it had been waiting for this moment since the day George Whitmore was born. The family pews were roped off. Of course they were. Appearances. Evelyn arrived last, dressed in black that whispered money. Pearls, gloves, a veil, like a first lady of mourning. She moved through the crowd like a matriarch in control of her fall from grace. She didn't glance at me, not once. I sat beside Melody in the front pew. Her fingers trembled as they clutched a crumpled tissue in her lap. He wasn't perfect, she whispered, but he didn't deserve to be buried in this mess. No one does, I said. The eulogy was standard, delivered by a colleague of my father's, full of recycled phrases about legacy and family and strength. But it was hollow, because George Whitmore hadn't been a pillar. He'd been a shadow, one who finally tried to step into the light just before it went out. After the service, I stepped outside into the rain and let it hit me. I needed something cold, something that reminded me I was still alive. That's when my phone rang. Blocked number. I answered. A man's voice, deep, low, unfamiliar. You don't know me, but I knew your father. My name is Richard Holloway. I stepped away from the cluster of mourners. What do you want? To give you something. He asked me to hold it until after the funeral. He said you'd understand when you saw it. Where? Come alone. No lawyers, no Melody. He gave me an address, a small town south of Asheville, and just like that, he hung up. 2 hours later, I pulled into a gravel lot behind an abandoned diner. A man in his 70s waited under the overhang, wearing a soaked tan jacket and holding a small leather briefcase. "Charlotte," he said. "You look like him." "I hear that a lot," I replied. He nodded. "Let's sit inside." The diner smelled of dust and rain. He poured 2 cups of coffee from an old thermos and pushed one toward me. Then he opened the briefcase. Inside, a single photograph. My father, younger, standing with Evelyn and another woman. A handwritten contract, a safety deposit certificate, and a birth certificate. I stared at the name. Margaret Evelyn Whitmore. Mother, father, Richard Holloway. I looked up, heart thudding. "Your—" He nodded. "Your father wasn't George. At least, not biologically. He married Evelyn when she was already pregnant. I was the father. But George raised you like his own. That's why he stayed. That's why he took so much. He thought he owed her. And you." I couldn't speak. Not out of anger. Out of fracture. Like someone had cracked a mirror I'd been staring into all my life. "Why now?" I finally asked. "Because he asked me to. He said you deserved to know the truth, but not until he was gone. He didn't want to risk you losing respect for both of them at once." I drove back to Asheville in silence. The rain had stopped, but the clouds lingered, low and heavy, like the sky hadn't exhaled yet. At the estate, Melody waited by the fire. She stood when I entered. "Where were you?" she asked. I sat across from her, studied the flames. "I met someone. Someone who knew Dad before all of this." She tilted her head. "Are you okay?" I looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I let my voice soften. "No, but I'm done pretending." 6 months later, the estate was quiet. Almost too quiet. The manicured hedges Evelyn once prided herself on had grown unruly. The iron gate stuck when it opened. The Whitmore house was no longer the symbol of power it used to be. It was just a house. Large, echoing, and full of things that meant less and less with every passing day. Melody chose to stay. She took a position in the education arm of the company, the part we rebuilt together, focused on ethics and transparency, 2 words our parents never said out loud. She still called every Sunday, always opened with the same line, "It feels lighter now." As for Evelyn, she moved to Savannah. A quieter town, a smaller house, a life where no one asked questions she didn't want to answer. We hadn't spoken since the board vote, but last week I received a card. No return address, no apology. Just a single sentence, written in that exacting, controlled handwriting I knew better than my own. "You were never meant to play by their rules. You were meant to build your own." Strange how sometimes the person who caused the most pain can still offer something that feels like peace, even if only in fragments. I didn't go back to the boardroom, didn't want the corner office or the legacy title. Instead, I used the remaining funds from George's personal trust to launch something else. The Holloway Institute. Yes. I chose that name, a place where women, especially those who'd been silenced, dismissed, or gaslit into invisibility, could learn financial literacy, legal autonomy, and leadership without compromise. We started in Chicago, then Atlanta, then Dallas. One of our first applicants wrote in her essay, "I didn't know people like me belonged in rooms where money is made. I thought those were family rooms, and I've never been welcomed in one." I kept that letter, because once I had felt the same way. I live in a loft now, downtown, high windows, no gates. Every morning I wake up and pour my coffee in a kitchen I designed, no one else's blueprint in sight. Sometimes I still hear Evelyn's voice, not as an accusation, but as a lesson I finally outgrew. And George? Well, he was never really mine, but maybe, in the end, I was his in the ways that mattered. I changed my name, not legally, but in spirit. I stopped signing documents as Charlotte Whitmore, CFO. Now it's just Charlotte. And for the first time, that's enough. Sometimes the most painful betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people who helped raise you, love you, and define who you are. But if this story taught me anything, it's that blood doesn't build legacy, character does. You don't have to follow the path you were handed. You can build your own, brick by brick, truth by truth. Have you ever had to choose between family and your values? What would you have done differently if you were in my place? If this story spoke to you, if it hit a nerve, or reminded you of your own journey, drop a comment, tell me where you're watching from, or even what part broke you most. And if it didn't, that's okay too. Tell me why. If this video moved you, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story that just might change the way you see your own.